Another cool feature that we like to use in our data system is the track map. The reason and the pros and cons behind using the track map feature is that if we're going to a new track for the first time, we can start to overlay our racing lines. So these are all picked up from our GPS from the data logger itself. And then once downloaded to our software, we can start to actually visualize where that driver is driving. Now, if we're looking at an experienced driver compared to a novice driver, or even just two drivers between the sessions, we can start to see whether a kart is using all the track, whether one kart's turning in too early, and giving it that race line, that visual effect is super important for a driver. Especially when we're looking at younger kids, say 7 up to 12, 13 years of age, they're more visual based. So if you can show them black and white in front of them where they're driving compared to either themselves between sessions or another faster, more experienced driver, that then helps them understand where they're going right and wrong on that lap. So now we're going to look at an example from a racetrack in Queensland between two separate drivers. Now, one driver here in our blue kart has driven this track before. Our red kart driver is having their first experience on the racetrack. Now, when we're starting to look at our racing lines on the track, we're starting to see where the red line is different to the blue line, because we know that the blue line is the fastest on this racetrack. Now, if we start to zoom in, the easiest way to zoom in is by clicking our up and down arrows on our keyboard. So by zooming in, you can start to dissect corner by corner. Now, what we start to notice is that the red line is not quite taking the same lines as the blue line. The red line starts to hold too tight of an exit. Now, we know as a driver and also as a coach, parent, mechanic, that anytime we turn that steering wheel, it's starting to slow the kart down. So the red driver, just by holding that corner too tight, is starting to lose its speed. But going through the next corner, now they're starting to turn in too late. So when you start to pass the information on to your son or daughter, you can start to show them not driving the same line as the fastest driver. Now, looking at other parts of the track, and we're starting to zoom in, again, turning too late into this chicane area. Now, by turning in too late, does that mean they're starting to be in the marbles a little bit and starting to lose some of that traction, that grip? Then they go into the next corner and they're starting to hug the next corner a little bit too tight. So these are the things that are quite easy to show your driver without even having to look at the speed trace or any other fancy information. It's just getting the racing lines right. You do the basics right, the speed will come. Again, a real important part of starting to learn with these drivers and the development that they have is by using all the racetrack. Now, when we start to go to new tracks, we're always a bit on edge about how far we can actually push the limits before we come off the track. So again, the red driver here is not using all the track. If we start to zoom in here, they're not flowing the kart out. So again, similar to turn 1, holding the kart too tight, that means they're starting to lose that speed. Going to the next hairpin corner, they start to turn in a little bit too early. We can see the red line. They take a shallower entry. Now, what happens with the shallow entry? Then you start to push out too wide in the middle of the corner. Now, that same driver then starts to take in the exit a little bit too tight. So there's 3 parts of the corner. There's an entry, there's a middle, and there's an exit. And the red driver hasn't been able to achieve anything that the blue line has. So again, showing a visual, it makes it a little bit easier for that red driver to the next session start to improve. If I turn a little bit later, hit the apex a little bit sooner, and then flow the kart out at the exit of the corner, that will automatically give me a better lap time. So this is the most simple way I would say to get your son or daughter to get the racing lines right. If you can overlay it with a faster experienced driver, it doesn't lie to you. Now, if you need to change the colors again, once again, you go to the left-hand side tab, you select the box, and by clicking a lighter color, because it might be on a darker background, you can click the yellow color as an example, and straight away here, if we zoom out, again, we can start to see it's pretty simple terms where your son or daughter is driving a different line to a faster driver. So another cool thing that we can assess on our track map is the engine tune. Now, the way we want to do that is by looking at our screen as our example is, when we're looking at our measurements chart here, we can click that and we can start to select what we want to see on our track map. Now, we can start to see the RPM around the track, the GPS speed, also the grip levels. In this example here, we're going to be checking the Lambda settings. Now this is more critical with our water-cooled engines, where engine performance is key. So by clicking Lambda value, applying an exit, that now brings up our track map with values to our left-hand side. Now we can start to change those values with knowing where the engine tune is basically performing. Now for our X30 engines, the lowest Lambda value that you normally see is around the 0.8 mark, and the highest Lambda value that you see is around the 1.03 mark. So we can start to adjust those measurements by clicking the arrows on the left-hand side here. By scrolling up and down, we sort of get to those measurements of 0.8. We start to scroll these ones down, basically where they're going to be driven around the track more often than not. Now what we're starting to notice here, we can start to see the colours change as we change the measurements on our left-hand side. Between the two sessions, what we're trying to look for is, around this first corner here, we can start to see that one particular lap has a lot more green shown, than the opposite lap has a lot more blue shown. The darker the colour on our map is the richer that the engine is. The lighter the colour, so if we're getting towards our yellow, our orange or our red, that's starting to show the hotter the engine, the leaner the carburation is. Now with engine builders these days wanting to hit specific points and specific numbers around the track, it's going to be very hard to look at your data logger while you're driving flat out around a corner. But by downloading this data onto our track map, we can start to see where the engine tune is really important. Now in this case, we can start to see that where there's more green, that the engine in the lower speed jet is a little bit leaner. And this is the fastest lap between the two. So then we can start to replicate the other session and start to say, well, okay, if we're moving forward with these engine tune settings, we can start to adjust the carb in between sessions, not so much on the track. Not all drivers feel comfortable tuning the carburetor while they're driving. Another example we're going to look at around the track is, so looking at our hairpin again, so the slowest speed on the track and coming out of a corner, we can start to see again there's a lot more yellow in the low speed compared to our other lap, which has got a lot more green. So again, more yellow, more orange is leaner on the low speed jet and a better performance on that lap. Looking a bit further around, we can start to see there's a couple of spots where there's red sections. In this instance, these are spots where the driver is not on the accelerator. So they've hit the brakes, they've got off the brakes, there's a little bit of a lean spot in the engine. That's totally normal and totally fine. But once again, we're looking at our second last corner here. We're looking at this part here, there's a lot more blue section. And again, looking at our tabs, that means that the Lambda settings are in that high 0.7s or low 0.8s. So we might find that it's a little bit sluggish out of the corners. So if your driver's feedback is that the kart is, or the acceleration, the engine is a little bit sluggish, we can start to download that data, bring up the track map, start to change that measurements to our Lambda value, and then start to assess where on the track it might be too rich or too lean. That's the best way when you're starting out to get your engine tune right, especially around different parts of the track, is to download and analyze the data right there in front of you. So when we log into our GPS track map and we start to analyze the measurements that we need to follow, we want to start to click this per lap color. To our left-hand side in that little square box up here, what that allows us to do is it actually brings up the rainbow measurements that we're trying to assess from corner to corner. Now what we start to notice is when we're looking at our way around that particular lap is, the darker the color, the richer the carburation, the lighter the color, the leaner the carburation. Clicking at any point around the track, we can see in this section here, there's also a value that you can cross-reference as well. So it shows the red driver is 0.99 Lambda and the blue Lambda is at 0.96. So not just the color, it also has a value there for you to look at.